I think fantastic input from Amanda and Tony. What Tony says always drives me nuts. It makes me so angry in a terribly constructive way that we have such a profoundly incompetent economic structure in our country. And during the economic crisis, I remember realizing that the country that was seen as the mothership of all things prudent and sensible, i.e. Germany, had the most diverse range of businesses and bankings and financial institutions anywhere in Europe. And they were doing much, much better than we were. We have just, anyway, enough said, what Tony said. Right, okay, I'm going to say essentially some very sort of broad-based stuff. We do live in really unreasonable times. We've been living in unreasonable times for really quite a long time. And I think now that means that we have to start thinking in a much more unreasonable way in order to figure out how we deal with the scale of the transformation. So the current status of Devon is that it is an extraordinarily ecologically diverse county. I'm going to sort of base myself in the notion of ecology, but of course everything is connected. We have really inventive, dynamic, bloody-minded, active communities across the county. And at the same time, we are facing existing threat from climate and ecological breakdown. I'm not going to go into the detail of that. It's just that it's really bad. It's really, really bad. And if you haven't got your head around how bad it is, then quite a lot of the discussion today isn't going to make sense to you. I'm thinking that quite a lot of the people here have understood the level of the threat we're facing. Although I did speak to somebody, two academics this week who both said, oh, well, people have been saying that for the last 20 years. You think, oh, you really haven't got this yet. So we've got this extraordinary ecological basis that has some fantastic strengths and some really significant threats with a whole range of habitats and members of that habitat who are threatened, which just isn't great. So I'm going to talk about 5 big thinks I've got on this. And the first thing is, if we want to try and deal with some of this, we need to think about the words we use, because that frames how we approach them. Economy basically comes from the Greek. It is about management of the oikos. Oikos is our work environment, our space, our hearth, our assets, the bit that we live in. Ecology is knowledge of the oikos. Onomy means management, ology means knowledge. So I don't think you can actually be an economist without being an ecologist. I don't see how we can decide how to manage something without knowing it first. And I would say that our entire financial institutions and structure is a structure that puts ecology at one end, with the weird end, and economy at the very positivist, blokey, present company accepted. This is how the real world works, and has not yet understood that they are profoundly connected. Germany, for example, has a much more diverse ecology of banking infrastructures. And some of the examples that Tony has given us, we don't. We have a monoculture. It's a really bad idea. Secondly, we do think in straight lines as a species. Some of those human condition flaws that Jay was talking about in his fantastic introduction. Everything that happens in the ecology of Devon is connected to its economy and vice versa with people involved. And we tend to only think of, we tend to think of it in straight lines, in linear ways and in separate ways. Whereas in actual fact, everything is part of the wider system. It's circular, it's nested, it's interconnected. And the number of people who still talk about us and the environment or the habitat, that's not how it works. It is literally all of us, all those species, trying to cohabit. And we're doing a really rubbish job of it a lot of the time. We still have this sort of dominant paradigm about extraction or dominance, even though we think we might not. It's still there in the back of our mind. So it's a good idea to check oneself. Thirdly, we have to challenge the narrative. We have to challenge those narratives that we are in without even realizing. I'll come back to that in a second. Imagine if, I don't know, if food shops, as part of their financial business model and sustainability and viability, they got planning permission on the basis of health and environmental growth, not just profit. Imagine if we used our food system to actually generate those connections between people and place, rather than just and habitat and soil, rather than just seeing it as a commodity. Our fourth crucial think is nurture those rule breakers, the gorilla planters, the fruit and nut tree geeks, the beaver collaborators. People are doing stuff really differently and bravely and courageously within that natural ecology. Bringing the notion of ecology into the way we think about everything else. So an ecology of institutions, an ecology of community groups, an ecology of thinking, of ideas, the plurality, the stuff that this 3-day event is bringing. Like, what else have we got here that we haven't thought about, that we've accidentally put outside, that we sort of think is outside what we're allowed to think about. The rule breakers are what is required for us to think, you know what, I was thinking in really straight lines about that. I hadn't thought about it that way before. And fifthly, know the water you swim in. Marshall McLuhan, a fantastic digital theorist, said a number of years ago, we don't know who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't a fish. And what he was saying essentially is that we do not know the water we swim in. We do not see those paradigms and narratives that we're part of. We just get used to it. And he says, in fact, and sort of describing this a little bit when he was talking about this analogy, he said, because people are completely immersed in the water we swim in, as fish in water, they live unaware of its existence. Similarly, when a conduct is normalized, this extractive, reductive attitude to our natural environment, when it's normalized by a dominant cultural environment, it becomes invisible. We do things we do not even see. I think Amanda was talking about some of these things, about challenging the way in which we understand how we operate in the world. Imagine if, what if we did a sort of what if Rob Hopkins imagine if process, where every business or planning application or local authority had a metric which included environmental growth. That is outside the way in which we think about the purpose of economy at the moment. What if participating in food growing was considered actually part of the NHS and not just a small thing to do with social prescription over here? What if we instituted the New Economic Foundation's National Gardening Leave, so everybody every month had something to do with what was happening outside and how we manage and work with those ecosystems? What we had microshares in every farm so that people understood what farming was and wasn't, that we actually had a process of enabling farmers to invest in decent food growing within ecological farming, and that they had a sense of, I've actually got long-term buyer input from local people. You know, these aren't radical ideas, but we have decided that they are. And if we keep ourselves in this position we have time, and we obey all those rules of thinking, we will never get anywhere else. We will always do what we have always done. Devon is one of the few counties that actually has a biosphere, which literally means, with an H, the circle or the ball of life. Imagine if all of Devon were thinking of that basis in which to operate its economy and its social constructs. Not just one individual place. Those little sort of insulated areas where we do things well allow us to do things badly everywhere else. What if we apply that to the whole county? I think this is about thinking big. I think somebody's got a washing machine on. But you know, it's good multitasking. So think big, imagine fiercely, and if a rule says you can't do something, decide which is the bigger risk, breaking the rule or breaking the planet. Figure out the water that you're swimming in, figuring out what it is, those cages that are locking in your imagination about what might or might not be. And for me, there are three obvious ways forward that we can help. Donut economics. Imagine if Devon and Cornwall together looked at the donut within their own counties and then started operating together on that basis. That could be a beautiful alignment with what Tony's talking in terms of how we manage our economy, that is constantly regenerative and redistributive, putting back in. What if we do some creative rule breaking? Start with your own rules. I'm not talking about going outside and getting yourself arrested. I'm talking about what is it that you think about the world that stops you thinking differently. One of the women who came to our original donut hack was one of the first things she said to me when I asked what her view might be. She said, oh, no, I don't talk in public. She's now since set up one of the most inventive climate action groups in Cornwall. They put together the most extraordinary climate action plan that everybody in Cornwall is looking, and people looking at the rest of the UK. And she's now talking to people outside the county about what they're doing in terms of climate and children and incredible edibles. So break your own rules and think about what it is you can do that will actually deliver multiple outcomes, so that everything is delivering across social, economic and environmental spheres. Because, you know, it sort of makes sense if we're going to move towards somewhere of that nature. So in upshot, I'm just going to put my alarm off. I was trying very hard to stick to my 7 minutes. Think about the words you use, because they're important. You might actually shut down a bit of your imagination. Don't think in those straight lines. Understand that this is about systems thinking. Challenge the narrative. Otherwise, you just sort of go off the same cliff that everybody else is going. Figure out what it is that's making you stick to those old-fashioned lines. Everything that Tony said is absolutely breaking the rules about how we think economics should work. And everything Amanda has said is breaking the rules about how we think business should operate inside those paradigms. Nurture those rule breakers, because we really need them collectively. And remember the fish, because without that, we will simply stay in the water that we cannot even see. So thank you. Go be visionary, disruptive, and even a tiny bit rule breaking, because that's how we will use this critical juncture of massive change to move us into something that could be brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I'm nearly in my time.